Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about money and specifically the origins of money and how it evolved into the notes and coins that we're familiar with today. Now let's start with a quick definition. What is money? Money is a medium of exchange between parties, which means it's accepted as payment for goods and services. You can use it to pay your taxes and to repay your debt. It can have intrinsic value like gold coins, or its value can be derived from the backing of a central authority like the government. Now, when we say intrinsic value, we mean the thing itself has value. So, for example, gold coins, even if they weren't used as a form of payment, they would still have value because their gold content has value. Now, this differs from the majority of coins and notes which are in circulation today, where their value is based on their face value. So, a pound coin is worth a pound, a £5 note is worth £5. A pound coin in raw material costs roughly 4p to make. So you can see that there's no real intrinsic value to that pound coin. And the same applies for a £5 note. That £5 note is only worth £5 because the government says so. If it's no longer legal tender, then it would quickly lose its value. And we've seen that recently with the discontinuation of the old £5 and £10 notes. So that is the definition of money. So we can see from that definition that money facilitates and enables trading. However, people were trading long before money was invented. So how was this possible? Well, one way is through what we call a barter economy. And this is essentially where individuals would exchange one good or service for another. So let's take an example. Let's say you're a fisherman and you'd like some vegetables. Well, you're a fisherman, you're an expert at fishing, but you don't know a thing about farming or growing vegetables. So you can approach a farmer and propose a trade, exchange some of your fish for some of the farmer's vegetables. Now, if the farmer is after some fish, then you can enter into a trade and you exchange your fish for the farmer's vegetables. Now, this is a mutually beneficial agreement. The farmer gets his fish, the fisherman gets his vegetables. However, there is a limitation to this type of trade, and that is its reliance on what is called the double coincidence of wants, or the coincidence of wants for short. Now, what does this mean? This means that this trade is only possible if each party has something that the other party wants. So if, for example, the farmer absolutely hated fish, well, then the fisherman now no longer has anything of value to offer the farmer in exchange for vegetables. One way around this would be to find a hunter, for example, who is an expert at hunting animals and gathering meat. And if the hunter is after some fish, then you could exchange some fish for some of the hunter's meat. And then you could take that meat back to the farmer and exchange it for some vegetables. Now, this clearly solves the issue, but it adds an additional step to the process and isn't the most effective or efficient way to do business. You can imagine if this was still in place today, taking a car manufacturer as an example, these companies can have very complex supply chains with hundreds of suppliers delivering the different components necessary to assemble cars. It would be virtually impossible to get all the components that you need while at the same time satisfying the double coincidence of wants. So a better system was needed. It's thought that in some societies or some communities with strong societal and cultural ties, a gift economy was used. And this is where individuals would essentially gift products, so goods and services, with the understanding that this would be reciprocated at some point in the future. Now, this resolves the requirement of the double coincidence of wants. However, it now introduces a new element of trust where this wouldn't really work with people who you didn't really know or you didn't really trust, or you probably wouldn't see again, like traveling merchants. An issue with these types of economies is that holding stock or goods with the intention to use them to trade at some point in the future is quite costly. It's expensive, especially if those goods are perishable like meat and vegetables, because fresh meat can't stay fresh forever, so its value will quickly decrease. And it's for that reason that precious metals quickly became the dominant way to store value, because of their durability and their relatively low maintenance. Precious metals were used in transactions in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, and gold coins were in use no later than the 4th century BC in China and the Middle East. Officially minted coins were introduced to help against counterfeit coins and to avoid the requirement to weigh the coins before each transaction. In the 16th century, when gold and silver mines were discovered in America, this resulted in an influx of these metals back into Europe, which then drove the price of these metals down considerably. And that was because of the old supply-demand equation. If the supply of something dramatically increases, then the price of that thing drops, and the opposite is true. If the supply contracts or falls, then the price of that thing increases, and that's because you will then have less sellers and more buyers, so the sellers would have more power and can increase prices. Now, in medieval Europe, notes evolved from promissory notes, and these were essentially receipts issued by wealthy individuals like goldsmiths or merchants once you deposited a certain amount of gold with them. So this receipt would say, whoever holds this receipt can at any point in time exchange this piece of paper for X amount of gold. So this receipt or this piece of paper now had value because it had gold backing it. And if it has value, then you can trade it. And that's exactly what people started doing. So as people started to use these notes to pay for their goods and their services, the wealthy individuals who issued these notes realized that, well, if they're happy to use these notes which are backed by gold, then chances are they'll be happy to use notes which are backed by other assets, such as the loans that we've extended to our customers. Now, it's important to understand that from a lender or from a bank's point of view, a loan is an asset because you've entered into a legally binding agreement to receive a certain amount of money in the future. And money has value, so if it has value, it's an asset. Even if you can't benefit from the value of that asset immediately and you have to wait until the loan is repaid in the future. So these wealthy individuals now started issuing these notes backed by assets other than gold. And this is where we saw the first real rise in what is known as free banking, where essentially these wealthy individuals were effectively acting as banks and issuing their own currencies. There are differences, however, between notes which are backed by gold and notes which are backed by other assets such as loans. And the two differences that we'll discuss today is liquidity and the uncertain value of the asset. Now, looking at liquidity, what is liquidity? Liquidity of an asset refers to how easy it is to convert this asset into something which is widely accepted as payment. So today that would mean cash. How quickly can I convert this asset into cash? Now, let's say you've stocked up on bottles of water. It's a really hot summer. Chances are you'll be able to convert those bottles of water into cash fairly easily because you'll be able to find people who are thirsty and who want to drink. Now, a house, on the other hand, although a house is an asset and is a very valuable asset, a house is not a liquid asset because it generally takes a long time to buy and sell houses. So back to our notes which are backed by gold and our notes which are backed by loans. If for whatever reason these notes are no longer accepted as a form of payment, the holder of a note backed by gold isn't too bothered. They know that they can simply exchange that note for some gold which they can then use to buy their goods and services because gold is still accepted as a form of payment. The holder of a note backed by a loan, however, would have a much harder time trying to convert that into something which is widely accepted as payment. Just try going into a shop and buying some goods and say, hold this piece of paper, but don't worry, you'll get your money back in 2 years' time. The shop owner isn't going to be interested. He's not a bank. He's not in a business of making loans. It just wouldn't work. So that's the issue surrounding liquidity. Now, the other issue surrounding the uncertain value of the asset. Now, determining the value of gold is fairly simple. We know the price of gold. We know how much gold we have. So you just multiply the price by the quantity and you have your value. Determining the value of a loan, however, isn't as straightforward. And this is because even though a loan is for £100, the value of that loan as an asset is only worth £100 if you know for sure that the borrower will be in a position to pay that loan back. And this is where you introduce credit risk or the risk of default, which I touched on in my previous video. Now, because of the uncertainty surrounding the ability of the borrower to pay the loan back, these notes which are backed by these loans, we're trading at a discount. So what does that mean? It means that if a note is backed by a loan of, say, £100, you could only buy 50, 60 to 70 pounds worth of goods with that note. And that's because people didn't want to assume the full risk of that note or the full risk of that loan. So what does this mean? Well, this now means that you have a note which represents an uncertain value. And as far as notes are concerned, that isn't very helpful if you're supposed to be using these things to pay for your goods and services. The issues surrounding liquidity and the uncertain value of these loans had a negative impact on the effectiveness of the system of money. And this led to the government finally stepping in and introducing banking regulations, which meant that the banks could no longer operate as freely as they were before and they could no longer issue their own currencies. It led to the creation of central banks such as the Bank of England and the US Federal Reserve to help regulate the supply of money and improve its stability, cementing their role as the main issuers of money. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video interesting and helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave that in the comment section and I'll see you next time.